good afternoon, or whatever time it is when you are checking this out. I am feeling very cut off from my classes, so thought I would quickly answer a couple of questions that came up from chapters 2 and 3 in the know, want to know, and have learned section. Uh, a lot of good stuff in there. So, two things though that came up, both there and in some of the responses to other things. That I wanted to check in on. So, first, a number of you asked, what does this title, The Black Jacobins, mean? Um, that's a good question. And CLR James is writing assuming that you know a whole lot about the French Revolution. Uh, Frankly, that's because at the time he was writing, most of the people he imagined reading this, the French Revolution was, and in many ways still is, better known than the Haitian Revolution. And so he was assuming this sort of background knowledge of the French Revolution. Anyway, so what is a Jacobin and what is a black Jacobin? During the French Revolution, there were a number of different factions, and frankly, while I am trying to record this video, I'm not even going to try to list them all. But remember, with the French Revolution, what kicked it all off was people were upset with the king. And in particular, they were upset with the king bankrupting the entire country. Just agreeing that you hate the king doesn't necessarily mean that you agree on a whole lot of other things. You can still hate each other on lots of other issues, even if you also hate the king and you have that going for you. You have that in common. So within the revolution, within the French Revolution, not the Haitian Revolution for the moment. So within the French Revolution, there are a number of different factions that were divided on some important issues. They're divided on, for instance, what is the role of the monarchy going to be? Will there still be a king? Will we be? There were some people who wanted France to become uh, what we would now call a constitutional monarchy. There were not a lot of other good examples of it at the time, but now look to something like Britain, right? People vote, they have a prime minister, they are a democracy basically, but they also have a queen who's hereditary and has certain kinds of functions within the country. There are other people who were very radical. People differed about whether or not slavery should be abolished. People differed about whether or not the free people of color in the colonies should be given full rights and duties as citizens or whether they should be discriminated against. People differed about the role of religion. They differed about the vision of what the economics of the French Republic were going to look like. So there were lots of divisions and factions inside the French Revolution, just like you've been reading about how there were factions inside of Haiti, and we are eventually going to see how there are some factions even inside of the slave revolution in Haiti. Um, so all that is the windup to say the Jacobins are one of these factions. They took power in 1794, if I am not much mistaken, and they were known as being one of the most radical factions within the revolution. They took over from a group called the Girondins, who were relatively radical. Most of the Girondins many of the Girondins were in favor of abolishing slavery, in favor of rights for people of color. They were fairly far to the left as far as the French Revolution went, but they were more moderate. The Jacobins were known as a very radical faction. They were in favor of abolition of slavery. They were in favor of rights for people of color. They also essentially wanted to abolish religion. There's a whole long story that can be told there. But remember, part of one strand of Enlightenment ideals was the replacing of tradition with reason, right? So they rededicated Notre Dame Cathedral to be the Cathedral of Reason. They renamed the months to get away from the Gregorian calendar. Because why is it called the Gregorian calendar? Because of Pope Gregory. It's a Christian calendar, right? So you will occasionally see in discussions of the French and Haitian revolutions people talking about, oh, this happened on the 18th Brumaire or the 11th Thermidor, and you may go, what the heck is a Brumaire? What the heck is a Thermidor? Those are the renamed months. that the Jacobins, part of the Jacobin calendar, right? So they were this pretty radical faction. They are best known probably for overseeing the Reign of Terror. Um, as they came into conflict with other factions in the revolution, they were known for having a very quick hand with the guillotine to get rid of people who did not agree with them, and that eventually their leader, Robespierre, and the other Jacobins were themselves guillotined. They lost their heads, and other factions came to power, mostly more conservative factions, after the demise of the Jacobins. But that's who they are. There's a lot more information about the Jacobins and other kinds of factions in the French Revolution on the Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité website that I linked from the faction assignment as a possible resource if you were really interested in like learning more about the Jacobins and the Girondins and the Royalists and other kinds of groups in the French Revolution. Um, so why the Black Jacobins? Well, CLR James favors the most radical parts of the French Revolution. He thinks they're the ones who get it right. He, while not quite an apologist for the violence of the Reign of Terror, he does point out and argues both in Black Jacobins and elsewhere that we tend to focus on the violence of the radical Jacobins and ignore the many people who were killed under other regimes. So, you know, Lafayette, yes, the same guy from American history, oversaw a massacre of anti-royalists during the French Revolution. Right, there's a lot of violence on all sides. So, CLR James is a supporter of the Jacobins. He thinks they basically get it right. They were the ones most friendly to the abolition of slavery. They were the ones who, in 1794, under Jacobin control, is when the National Assembly abolishes slavery. And he sees the Haitian revolutionaries like Toussaint Louverture, as essentially the intellectual inheritors of these radical traditions that the Jacobins are representing in France. In other words, as black Jacobins, as opposed to the white Jacobins who were the French. Um, there's a lot of complexity to whether or not he's right about that. You may not share his rosy view of the Reign of Terror. And also, as we will hopefully eventually get to, in a lot of ways, Toussaint Louverture was pretty conservative, right? If he was French, he might not end up being a Jacobin. He had relatively small c conservative ideas about how society should be run. You know, he wanted the slaves to be freed, but, for instance, he thought that Catholicism should be the state religion. He was not anti-religion. Um, it is what it is. We'll talk about it more. All right, so the other thing I wanted to mention is the free people of color. One thing that it is important to keep in mind is that the role of free people of color, and some of you guys talked about this, some of your answers maybe think that this is worth repeating, is that the role of free people of color in Saint-Domingue, in the French colonies, is pretty different from the role of people of mixed race in a place like the United States at the same time. So there are some similarities. As the book points out, as many of you rightly noted, if 1/128th of your ancestors are of African descent, you are not white as far as Saint-Domingue society is considering you. But you're also not black, right? You're this own thing. You're a person of color, right? Or as James calls them, mulattoes, right? But they're a separate social class in Saint-Domingue, and even today in a lot of the Caribbean. You're definitely not white, but you're also definitely not black. In Saint-Domingue in particular, it's worth keeping in mind that many of these people were quite wealthy and powerful. Your Raimonds, your Augers, your Rigaud's are wealthy. They own land. They may own slaves. They have political clout. And that's, in fact, what made them seem so threatening to many of the whites. They even had a lot of social clout. One thing that is mentioned in passing in James and gets discussed elsewhere is if you were a especially if you are a poor white man, right? Not super poor, but like not wealthy, right? You're one of these small whites. Maybe you're an artisan, maybe you are a shopkeeper, maybe you are an employee of a plantation, like an overseer on a plantation. Um, because Sendameng is not the kind of place where people are bringing their families, there are not a huge number of marriageable women in Sendameng at any given time. White marriageable women, at least. Marrying a woman of mixed race could be the route to social and economic advancement for a lot of poorer whites, right? And the taboo against intermarriage is not as strong in Saint-Domingue and in the French colonies in general as it was in the United States or in the British colonies. So many of the wealthy and powerful mixed race families had a lot of social power. They were connected to white families. They controlled economic uh, terrain, and their favor was sought. Right? People wanted them. Many whites wanted them to hold them in high regard. And at the same time, there's this very ambivalent thing, right? They had a lot of respect, they had a lot of power, they had a lot of wealth. They also were disrespected because of their mixed race background and resented for their power and wealth. So when the French Revolution kicks off, and suddenly a lot of people are going, I hear in France what they're doing is killing rich people and taking their stuff, right? This is where a lot of small whites become get the idea that this is the time that they can come and really attack the wealthy people of mixed race, that they both are attracted to and respect and fear and resent. It's a very, very dangerous combination on the eve of the revolution. But the ambivalent attitude of a lot of whites towards the people of mixed race and the ambiguous political and economic position that they're in doesn't make sense unless you keep in mind that they are occupying this very specific middle position in Haitian society at the time, where they are not regarded as white and they're also not regarded as black. And one of the big fights is, are they going to get regarded as French, or are they going to be treated as non citizens in some way? All right. Hopefully that made things clear and not less clear. But we'll see.